So making up for lost time is when an individual has a behavioural change because they've either perceived a period of lost time in the past or they're anticipating lost time in the future. It can also be an interaction between those two. And because of this, they engage in coping up behaviours to make up for the lost time. Examples of previous time losses when an individual is seeking to make up for lost time can be, for example, if an individual, for example, has had a prison stay, family separation, that can be caused due to divorce or immigration. Anticipating future lost time, an example of this was found for military personnel when they could anticipate that they would be going on another period of deployment in the future. And an example of an interaction between previous time losses and future time losses, again, is military personnel because they seek to make up for the lost time from the previous period of deployment and also the future periods of deployment. My study focused on understanding the psychology of making up for lost time in the post-pandemic event consumption context. And this is a very important context for the making up for lost time concept to be studied in, as all those previous contexts focus on a period of time deprivation which only affects the individual, whereas the COVID-19 context is a period of deprivation which was experienced at the societal collective level. So it's important to see how that might influence what we know about the concept. The whole point of, like, when we were looking at it from the collective standpoint, it's because when we're going to events and purchasing event tickets, because the time deprivation because of COVID-19 affected everybody, that would have an impact when we saw, for example, Ticketmaster reported 600% increases in traffic to their website. It affects the collective because everybody was trying to make up for lost time, not just one individual. In the context of events, it was particularly relevant at that period of time because there was an increased likelihood of individuals having FOMO from not being able to go to events. There was reduced capacities, but there was also an increased demand for event tickets, which made the probability of securing those tickets more difficult, which meant that the individual would be more likely to experience FOMO from not being able to attend those events after already not being able to attend them for 18 months. And if they didn't secure those tickets, that would extend the need to make up for lost time further because they would still be deprived from being able to attend events. When an individual is engaging in coping up behaviour to make up for lost time, what we found was that there was an increase in the quantity of purchasing, so they were purchasing more event tickets, that there was an increase in an open-mindedness to attend different types of event, which they typically wouldn't have attended pre-COVID, and also that their buying behaviour was more impulsive. So there would be a quicker thought process. They would, for example, see that the event was on sale and buy a ticket straight away because they were worried that the events would sell out because of the increased demand for events post-COVID. So touching back on the second attribute, which is an increase in an open-mindedness to attend different types of events which they typically wouldn't have gone to pre-COVID, although we found that they were more open-minded, this open-mindedness didn't always come through to their actual purchasing activity. So, for example, although they wanted to go to a different type of festival that they'd never been before, when it actually came to purchasing, they would kind of stay to what they knew before COVID. So there were three main drivers when individuals were seeking to make up for lost time post-pandemic. And these are, number one, previous time losses, number two, anticipating potential future lost time, or thirdly, an interaction between those two prior drivers. So beginning with the first driver, which is previous time losses, this is embedded in, so obviously during the pandemic lockdown, individuals weren't able to go to events that they previously were able to go to. And consumers value these types of events. It's a period of time where they're able to disconnect from their life commitments such as work, and they're able to go and enjoy themselves. So to have a period of 18 months where they're not able to engage in events, when they come out of that lockdown, they typically purchase more event tickets and want to try new things because they have been deprived of those experiences for such a prolonged period of time. With the driver of previous time losses, another important point to mention is that not every individual always feels the need to make up for lost time. Now, we found from one participant in particular, because during the period of lockdown, they found value in that period of time, which meant when they came out of lockdown, they didn't feel the need to make up for lost time because they didn't deem that lockdown period as a period of lost time. So it's just important to note that not every individual in the same social condition will always feel the need to make up for lost time. So with anticipating potential future lost time, with COVID-19, I guess in the present day it's a bit different now, but when we first came out of lockdown, we didn't know when another lockdown could come into play. It was never really ruled out completely by the government, or we've all seen on the news sometimes where numbers are increasing. There's always that threat, no matter how little it is, that a lockdown could come into play again. So with that in mind, individuals are also seeking to make up for their potential future lost time in the future by going to more events in the present day. And then with the third driver, an interaction between previous time losses and anticipating potential future lost time. In that situation, the individual is thinking about the previous lockdowns that they had already experienced, and also the likelihood of potentially going into lockdown again. So this is where those two come together, and I guess we don't know if it's more powerful than either or, but that's another motivation where they're seeking to go to more events. When the individual has a need to make up for lost time, there are two types of barriers which can affect their ability to make up for lost time. The first type of barrier that an individual can experience when making up for lost time is a type of barrier which affects the onset of being able to engage in making up for lost time activities. So in an event context, an example could be financial, so whether they have the disposable income to be able to purchase event tickets. On the flip side of that though, money can also be a facilitator in this example, because during COVID-19, some individuals were able to save money, which then they could use when we came out of lockdown to purchase more event tickets. So it just depends on the individual's circumstances. And then the second type of barrier, which can affect an individual's ability to make up for lost time, they're those barriers that affect the quality of the making up for lost time activities. So an event example is when we first came out of lockdown, and events were being put on, but they weren't the same as pre-COVID. At that point, there were still measures in place where you'd either have to wear a mask, reduce capacities, you'd have to sit down. It just meant that the experience was not the same experience that that individual could have had pre-COVID-19, which means that they cannot make up for lost time to the same extent as they would be able to if the experience was the same pre-COVID. So when it comes to resolving the need for making up for lost time, what we found was if an individual engaged in making up for lost time activities, so going for events, as soon as the lockdown ended, in the case of our study, those participants felt that their need had been resolved and that they didn't feel like they were still needing to make up for lost time in the present day. However, the ones who, because of barriers, were unable to engage in making up for lost time activities as soon as the lockdown ended, which meant that their need to make up for lost time was prolonged further, those participants were found to still be feeling the need to make up for lost time in the present day. So I don't feel like there's a expiry date on the need to make up for lost time in a sense of, for example, oh, you've been to 5 events, it's done, and that's the same for everybody. It's such an individual need and feeling that I don't feel like it's a quantifiable concept in that way. But there are some kind of, not rules, but more that if you engage in those activities quicker, the need will be reduced quicker. So that was mainly past orientated, or in a situation in the interactional approach where the past time losses weigh more heavily. However, for an individual that is quite focused still on anticipating future time losses, the resolution for the need to make up for lost time will be prolonged until that individual is satisfied that that threat of future time losses is no longer present. So the implications of understanding the making up for lost time concept for event professionals is very important. For example, with pricing, following the lockdown period, some individuals were able to save money, so had disposable income, but also because of the deprivation tied in with the disposable income, they would be more inclined to spend more money on event tickets. But this also applies to anticipating potential future lost time as well, because when an individual can sense that deprivation coming, they'll be more inclined to spend more money to get those experiences prior to going into another period of lockdown, for example, where they wouldn't be able to attend events again. Secondly, for marketing communications, making up for lost time is an idea that can be weaved in through your messaging. So, for example, if we come out of a lockdown, or when we came out of a lockdown, just associating the messaging with everything that person had missed out on, reminding them of what they missed out on and what they could miss out on again if we, for example, went into another lockdown, or if they weren't able to secure event tickets. And thirdly, with the product design, we need to ensure that following a period of lockdown, the events we are designing are as close as possible to the experiences that event attendees were having pre-COVID or pre another cause of deprivation, to ensure that the attendees want to attend the events, because if they know it's not going to be up to that same level, they'll be inclined to not purchase tickets because they'll think, what's the point really? So there are 3 implications for event professionals with the making up for lost time concept.